It was a year later, they did the same thing for Martin Luther King, who was not a Christian at all, whose life was immoral. I'm not saying he didn't do some social good, and I've always been glad that he was a pacifist, or he could have started a real revolution. But you don't honor a non-believer who misrepresented everything about Christ and the gospel.
Welcome to the Evangelical Eddie channel. We're going to dive into this issue that has flared up recently between John MacArthur and Pastor Charlie Dates out of Chicago regarding Martin Luther King Jr. Now, this all started with a Q&A session back in February of 2024, where John MacArthur was asked about Martin Luther King. And in his response, he mentioned that Martin Luther King Jr. was not a Christian. Well, that just got a lot of people fired up with that comment. And so I wanted to first look at the reaction of Pastor Charlie Dates, because in response to these comments, Pastor Charlie Dates issued a word of correction to MacArthur. Now, he leads two historically black churches in Chicago, and he expressed his disapproval of MacArthur's statements and urged pastors of all backgrounds to refrain from using MacArthur's resources. That's right. He has called on canceling John MacArthur, as it's known now in our culture when you do something like this. So let's look at Charlie Dates' response to John MacArthur.
I've been thinking a lot this week about, as I do every week really, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If I got a chance to meet one person, the Lord said, hey, you get to meet one person who went to heaven before, which, by the way, John MacArthur, he did go to heaven, and he was a Christian. And we ain't going to tolerate all of this foolishness from white evangelical pulpits trying to deny the integrity of our leaders. And I hope somebody sent this to you, man, because I tried to tell you before. If you ain't going to raise a finger to help us get the right to vote, to live where we want to live, to go to school where we want to go, keep Martin King's name out of your mouth, bruh. I'm so angry I could cry. There are people even right now. Dr. King been dead for 50 years. Right now, say he was not a Christian. Who are you?
So at this point, it needs to be addressed. Why did John MacArthur claim that Martin Luther King Jr. was not a Christian? Well, it looks like back during his time at Crozier Theological Seminary, King expressed thoughts on certain topics that are very orthodox in Christianity, and so it does bring the question of what his beliefs were regarding the deity of Christ, the virgin birth, the divinity of Jesus, and especially the resurrection of Jesus. Now, regarding the resurrection, there are conflicting accounts, and through the years, all of us can say if we wrote papers earlier in our life like he did, and compared what we thought about Jesus and about the Christianity in general to what we might have believed later, there would be some potential changes. I know there are in my life. So it's hard to get focused on writings from long ago that he wrote. However, if he did not change his view on some of these, it would cause us to draw a conclusion that he may not be a Christian, because certainly the resurrection of Jesus is a huge doctrine, not to mention the other ones I just mentioned. And so that is why John MacArthur brings this up, because from all the evidence he can see, it does not appear that Martin Luther King fully believed the gospel.
There was a man who has a monument now in Washington, D.C. That man was a neo-Marxist and a socialist and a pastor and a tremendous orator, and his name was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was wrong on the gospel, and he was wrong on worldview as a liberal Marxist socialist. But he left a tremendous legacy.
So I present all this to point out that there are some legitimate and interesting reasons for some people to question Martin Luther King Jr. in terms of his Christianity. But for myself, I'm just not in the business of deciding who gets in and who doesn't, who is actually saved and who isn't. I know we will know his true disciples by their fruits, and I'm just going to leave it at that. But what I don't like seeing are pastors urging other people and urging other pastors of all backgrounds to refrain from using somebody's resources, or in this case, John MacArthur's commentaries and past resources. In an open letter this past week, Charlie Dates said the following: "Perhaps we should tell you that we are calling on Christian clergy of all colors to stop reading your commentaries, to dislodge themselves from your conferences, and to give your voice no amplification in their teaching until," and then he has his demands. So what are your thoughts on this attempt to cancel John MacArthur? Let me know in the comments below. Have a blessed day, everybody.